Our guest today is Steve Hely, whose credits include The Office and American Dad, and he's about to start writing for the next season of Veep. We found out just before we started, so that's very exciting. With American Dad, he was part of the first group of staff writers. He's also written a couple of books that we'll talk about a little bit later. He originally comes from the east coast of the US, a place called Needham in Massachusetts. That was sold by its original inhabitants to settlers in 1680 for a combination of money, land, and corn.
You know that. Someone's been on Wikipedia.
Yeah, hello. £10.
Is that how much it cost?
£10, 40 acres, and then some amount of corn.
Good deal.
Yeah, it was great. We also have Benjamin Law, or Ben, whatever's easier. He says that in the book, so I've just taken that. I've just stolen that directly from you.
Absolutely.
He's the author of, amongst other things, The Family Law, a memoir that SBS adapted into a TV series by the same name. He also, he wrote and co-wrote most of that season, and he's also the author of Geisha, Adventures in the Queer East. There's no way to know what that book is about.
It's subtle play on words.
He's originally from the southern part of the Sunshine Coast, a place called Caloundra, that boasts a heritage-listed caravan park.
Oh, yeah.
So please welcome Steve and Benjamin. While we're talking about personal histories, I was born in Fitzroy. I grew up in Moorabbin. My parents once ran a linen store in a shopping centre called Flinders Fair that stood across the road from here, right next to St Paul's Cathedral. So this place, very dear to my heart.
A lot of local history today.
Yeah, a lot of local history. So there's a lot to cover here, and obviously it's the writer's room. We're going to be talking a little bit about television, but these guys are so interesting. I don't want to limit just to television. So we'll start off with a TV-related question, but also something about families. Ben, your show and book are about your real-life family.
Yes.
Steve, you've written for The Office and for American Dad, which are, I consider The Office to be a family show.
Yep.
So you've written about invented families.
Yeah.
Can the two of you just have a fight about which is easier to write for?
Okay, who wants to
You
start?
take the pro.
Do you mean like a physical fight?
If that's what the people want, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down
They
thing.
cheer for it.
No,
First of all, I'm not going to mess with... I've been traveling in Australia. I was up in Brisbane, and wherever I go, Ben Law is like a famous...
Just in
beloved
Brisbane.
figure of Australian literary life. Everybody tells me some new cool detail about him.
He went to a bookstore where I worked for 5 years. That's why he thinks I'm famous.
I'm not messing with him.
if you'd gone to Movieland in Caulfield where I worked, I would also be like
Okay, well, look.
So, writing for your real family.
Yeah.
It's weird.
And so let's just start with how much are you willing, because you write comedy, the show is itself a sitcom about divorce. Hilarious.
It's the funniest thing in the world.
But how much are you willing to give up fidelity for gags?
Okay, so when I finished writing the book, the dirty secret about the book is that it has no structure. It's kind of like, I was reading a lot of David Sedaris at the time, and I liked what he was doing, which is writing these essays, essentially, that you smash together into book form, and then you can call it a book. And that's what The Family Law was, and even within the stories, it jumps back and forth in time. Like, within one essay, you might have me going from present day right back into the 1950s, a story about my dad, and then bring it back to present day or whatever. And that wasn't ever going to work for television. So when Matchbox Pictures, the local production company here who make The Slap, Barracuda, Glitch, Nowhere Boys, Real Housewives of Melbourne, and also Real Housewives of Auckland. Very, very ambidextrous production company. When they bought the rights, one of the first things that we had to figure out was how would this work as a narrative arc? What is the story that we want to tell? Because the book touches on so many things, you know, like racial identity, sexual identity, my parents getting divorced, and we thought, well, the most interesting arc that we could follow is probably the parents' breakup over one summer. Eventually, we pushed it to present day. Originally, it was set in the 90s, and for a lot of reasons, we pushed it to present day. So already we're leaving fidelity to the text or to real life behind. And also, in some ways, you know, we're working for a comedy. So yeah, there'll be gags, and we're not making a documentary either. We're always saying the main thing is about an emotional truth, and then, you know, in some of the episodes, there's stuff in the show that happened in real life that was never in the book. Like, there's a first scene where one of the parents kicks the other one out, effectively, and that was taken from real life. And when I thought back on the book, which is partly about divorce, I was like, I'm sure that scene's in the book somewhere. I'd never written it until the TV show called for it. So yeah, we make stuff up, and we always kind of go back into personal history, not just mine, but also the other writers in the room. So I'm not a parent. A lot of the parents are giving their insights into parenting and divorce. I might be giving my personal history, but there are other Asian Australian writers in the room who are talking about cultural differences as well that resonate with my story. So we're all sharing a lot. It's not just purely my story in the end.
Who is the funniest person in your family, aside from yourself?
Oh, my mum.
Yeah.
My mum, definitely. I mean, I mean, when you're growing up with someone funny and she's your mother, you're deeply embarrassed by her,
Yeah.
right? Like, she's the one who is saying to you in Cantonese, wash your genitals or they'll grow worms. She's the one...
Is that true?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, leave it long enough, it might actually happen. And she was always very, very inappropriate, bailing up, you know, other mums. And her icebreaker is always childbirth. Like, oh my God, have you had children? What happened to your vagina? Let me tell you about mine. And it's like, whoa, Mom, that's really intense. But
It's a really good icebreaker for anyone.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and we're
How's
going to
your
use that
vagina?
later on. How's yours going? And so she's definitely the funny one. So she's the central character in the show in a way, because she's kind of the central character in our lives.
So in that way, when you're writing that comedy and you've got that easy real life outrage that you can do, and Steve, with a lot of the work that you do, like the comedy that you write for television, a lot of it comes out of this outrageous thing that someone says. Ben seems to kind of have it easy because his mum actually says stuff like that, whereas you have to invent crazy stuff that people say.
Yes. I mean, I thought it was interesting how you mentioned that The Office being a family comedy, because it's really about the American version of The Office is really about this guy, the boss, who really wants love and he doesn't know how to get it. And he's trying really hard he's supposed to be the boss of this workplace and he doesn't know how to do it because all he really wants is everybody to like him. And it's really, really hard for him to do that as the boss. And like, that's an interesting tension that we all have, right? We all want to get love and it's hard to get, and how you're trying to get it. And sometimes you're getting too much of it and it's smothering, and sometimes you're desperate to get it and you don't know where to turn. Your family ultimately is the place where you learn what love is like, how it's expressed, and that is probably where we all start thinking about how we're supposed to operate in the world and how we're supposed to live, whether it's acceptable to ask people about their vagina on first meeting. That sets the bar for all of us. And I think for the rest of our lives, we're kind of adjusting and being like, oh, it turns out my family was a little bit weird in this way or not weird in that way, and trying to find our way in the world as we join the larger human family.
So with that in mind, and we hear, so when I studied screenwriting at RMIT, and one of my teachers was telling me that comedy comes out of this sense of hate. So you think of the thing that you hate, and he was a bitter man.
Angry fella, yeah.
Think of something that you hate, exaggerate it out, and that's where you get the comedy. We also get this rule of tragedy plus time equals comedy. We also get the comedy of something terrible happening to someone else, so being the other. But the things that you work on, but both of you, the comedy comes out of a real sense of love.
Yeah.
So where do you find the comedy in love? I told you it was going to be tough questions, guys.
This is intense.
No, it's a good question, because I'm still really new to television writing, and even though I studied it at university, I thought that was kind of it. I wasn't going to use it again. I was just going to write books or magazine articles, and I was very happy about that. So when it actually got picked up and I could actually use my final draft license and use that software legitimately again. It was a great thrill, but I thought because we were writing a comedy, we always had to hit gags constantly, and I was really, really concerned about that. And as time went on, what we realized with the show was that we weren't writing, say, Arrested Development, which has amazing gags pretty much in every scene. And what we were writing was a show where, like when you're talking about this very human conundrum of someone needing love, and it's really difficult for them because of their personality
Right.
to find it. That's a really human conundrum, right? And when we're dealing with a show about a family that's going through divorce, that's a really human, deeply vulnerable situation to be in. So our motto was, we will make them laugh, but only after ripping out their heart. Because you can't use something like divorce lightly, especially when you're telling it through a child's eyes. Like, it's a really big deal for a family to go through something like that. You can't just use it as ammo to get laughs in. So yes, there is a scene where, a girl gets attacked by a bird while another kid's dressed as a watermelon and falls. Like, there's crazy, mad, capery stuff going on, but we're going to cut straight to a scene where that triggers off an argument between two adults that's really, really real, and then we're going to cap that off with a punchline as well. So when we started off, the producers were saying, what's the truth of this? What's the emotional truth? And I was just like, dude, this feels like Oprah. What are we talking about? I thought we were writing a comedy, but it always does come back to it. If you don't buy that situation emotionally, the comedy won't land.
Yeah, let me take what you were saying about your professor talking about hate. I think that might be a little bit strong. But I do know, I remember reading about the American sort of self-help guru named Dale Carnegie, who wrote this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he got his start in the 1920s giving these public speaking courses. He thought that public speaking was really important to anyone's self-confidence and really important to business. And something that he discovered in teaching public speaking, especially to people who were really shy, is he would make people give a speech about something that they were angry about. And he found that even a shy person is capable of going on a rant. If you get them started on something that makes them angry, it's very easy for them to start talking about it. And anger and upset feelings, conflict is a very good way to start writing anything. And yeah, you were talking about love or divorce. Like in a divorce, I imagine it's, I love this person or I have loved this person, but I need to get away from them. I need to get you out of here. And that is there's so much conflict. There's conflict inside the human heart and there's conflict with another person. And it just creates this, the way that you're going to express that is going to be so all over the place and so interesting and so upsetting. And so it's going to be out of your control. It creates dynamic scenes. It creates drama, right? Yeah. And comedy.
So let's back it off. Go into some craft for a bit, just to let that settle. American comedy writing and Australian comedy writing. Australian comedy writing for TV seems to be a very solitary process, unless you're working on a sketch comedy. If you're working for a half-hour narrative, it seems like you're working alone a lot of the time. But for American shows, I remember since Roseanne, knowing that there were lots of writers on a show in a room trying to work on something. So how does it work? We understand the idea of the solitary writer who just works with a typewriter and has to get stuff out, because that's the nice cliche that we have. How does it work in a room? Steve, that's at you. Okay, that's at you. This is you.
Well, I don't know. I think the difference is a little bit might be like, a guy who's a small craftsman and he has a little shop, and then the brand gets sold to Target or Woolworths or whatever your big store is. Suddenly you have to mass produce it and you have to do a lot of it and you have to bring people in to help you out, and suddenly you're doing the job of managing this big business versus doing a little thing like your show has 6 episodes in a
Yep.
season, right? A typical American show has 22 episodes, and you just can't do it by yourself. You would lose your marbles. So what usually happens is there's a person who's the showrunner, who's a writer, who usually created the show, and they bring in a team of people, and they are trying to express to them, this is what I want, this is my rough vision for the show, but I need you guys to help me to do it. I need you to help me come up with stories. I need you to pitch ideas. I need you to be able to get into the voice of these characters. And for the person who's running the show, it's like they're listening to 8 different radio stations at once, and they need to be really good at tuning in and tuning out and gathering what's useful to them and putting it to work and making decisions very quickly. So yeah, it's a more, I don't know, corporate or less artisanal activity, but ideally it can work out really well and make some cool entertainment for people.
And so when you're doing 22 episodes a year, are you really just trying to churn out a script a week, a script a fortnight?
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, on American Dad, which has made 200 some episodes, like somebody is writing a script, other people are in the room, they are coming up with a new episode, and meanwhile, another room full of 5 or 6 people are rewriting an existing episode. So there's multiple stages of production going on at a given time, and meanwhile, an episode is being animated and an episode is being recorded. There's a lot of management that happens, and it's challenging for sure. It's like it's a next level of creativity, and hopefully you don't lose the magic and the essence of what makes the show special, but you're moving a lot more pieces at once than you might be if you're just sitting at home writing each script yourself.
And how can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How often because that sounds like a huge team.
Yeah.
So how often is that huge team in the same room?
Once a show gets into production, people are doing their own thing because somebody's writing an episode, and it pretty quickly fractures. At the beginning of the season, usually there's like a pre-production period where everybody can be working together, coming up with ideas, pitching on stuff together. Maybe you break into 2 rooms because if you have 12 or so people, it's a lot of voices in the room, and it might just be better to have 2 smaller teams than 1 big team going. But on most of the shows I've worked on, yeah, there's a time of everybody together, and then there's a time of sending people off to do stuff.
Steve, can I ask you to read a little bit from your book?
You may.
So it's there's a particular word there that I've started, but yeah, if you could just read what I've kind of marked out in pencil.
From here to here.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Shh. Steve's reading.
I'm describing here, by the way, being in El Salvador, going to a little beachy kind of place. When I got to La Tortuga Verde, it was late in the afternoon. The outdoor tables in the courtyard were filled up with families, big Salvadoran families having picnics, and beyond them, framed like a picture by big palm trees, was the beach and the ocean. This was great. I flopped my bag down in my room, walked outside, and sat down on the sand. A teenage girl sitting nearby was smiling at me. She said hello. "What should I do here?" I asked her. She shrugged. "Do nothing. The owner of the property has been surfing since the age of 12. And so the La Tortuga Verde connection with the ocean and having a positive impact on it is more than a focus. It's a lifestyle." So too read the website. In the night after the sun went down and the local families left, and I was eating fish and drinking cold bottles of Pilsner beer, I met this owner. His name was Tom. I have to tell you that I didn't like him. That's because when he asked me what I did, and I told him I was a TV writer, he interrupted me and said, "Well, it's pablum for the masses. But you know, everybody has to make a living." He wasn't wearing a shirt, obviously. People who are having a positive impact on the ocean as a lifestyle don't wear shirts. He had wild hair and was maybe 45, well-sunned, the obvious lazy king of his backpacker kingdom. I also didn't like him because the teenage girl who'd smiled and told me to do nothing turned out to be his girlfriend. I don't know, maybe she wasn't a teenager, but she looked like it, and she tossed off some instructions to her in a tone like he was so far beyond her in worldly experience, it was adorably tiresome to speak to her. Just because I didn't like him doesn't mean he was uninteresting or even a bad guy. He had, after all, built this place on the wild shore of Central America, a lot of it with his own hands, and the local families and the tripped-out Germans and Americans and Canadians washed up and lounging in bliss there all seemed to find it a happy place. I did too. It was terrific. It's just that, okay, first of all, we are in a golden age of television. And I don't think The Office and 30 Rock and American Dad, 15th longest running TV comedy of all time, are, quote, pablum, unquote. And second of all, decent pablum is very hard to make. Pablum should be much more appreciated. If you don't believe me, you try making pablum the masses enjoy. It's much harder than running a friggin' turtle sanctuary / pelican retreat. Believe me.
So that's from The Wonder Trail. You can buy it later. Steve will be signing it. We'll cover off on that later on as well. So pablum for the masses.
Yeah.
Novels used to be considered to numb the brain.
Yeah.
The only reason movies are revered is because French people made it sound cool while smoking.
Yeah.
So TV still has its critics, and it has its proposers, like the people who keep it up. And I was one of those for many, many years, and now I am lucky enough I could get to switch shows off if I don't like them in the first 30 seconds, like everyone else, which is
Move
exciting.
along.
But why do you think people play status games with entertainment? Oh, you write for television. Well, that's not very uplifting. You're not helping anybody with that, are you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember when I was a kid and The Simpsons came on, and I was probably like in 4th grade, like maybe 10 years old, and The Simpsons came on, and it was on against The Cosby Show. And my parents considered this like a battle of good against evil, with The Cosby Show being good. Like it was about this family, and it was more or less enriching in its values, and Bill Cosby was this great, dignified figure.
He's never going to do anything wrong.
He had a doctorate and whatever. And The Simpsons, meanwhile, was this cartoon, and the kid was skateboarding, and Dad was choking him. But I was like, this is something so special and interesting. I couldn't wait to watch it. And I think history has turned, and perhaps now we might reflect on The Simpsons and consider it a great work of art and be rethinking our opinion of The Cosby Show. So none of our opinions about these things tend to be too static. I think when I was a kid growing up, TV was looked at as kind of like trash, the boob tube, whatever. And now I think like people, like TV is maybe even getting too much critical respect. And people might look at like the internet or YouTube or Twitter or something as like kind of trash, waste of time. But perhaps in 20 years, we'll look back at that and be like, oh, there are all these interesting artists doing cool, inventive stuff. I don't know. What do you think? How is TV perceived in your house?
Well, so I was one of 5 kids,
Okay.
and when you've got 5 kids, it's kind of a feral household.
Right.
And you need things to occupy. Like, TV was kind of revered in our house, actually. And there was never any kind of poo-pooing in our house. So I feel like I was raised knowing that there was good stuff on television. And my mum especially was really omnivorous with what she watched on television. I mean, when I talk about my mum being inappropriate, remember Sophie Lee's Sex Life and how that was a really controversial show? It was basically like this 1-hour show on Channel 9 just about sex every week.
Okay.
And it was very controversial, and my mum would call us to watch TV when it was on. So
Come
we
see
would
this. Come
we would watch
learn.
like Sex Life, we'd watch like cartoons. Simpsons was huge in our household. Like that was almost mass for the non-religious family that we were, and but we'd also watch like a lot of weird foreign dramas on SBS, one of the public broadcasters here as well. Like we'd watch a lot of subtitled programming, because and I never saw that distinction between high and low film and TV, because a lot of it we were watching on TV anyway. Like a lot of the films we were watching on telly. So I think I was kind of lucky in that I always saw it as something to be respected and cherished. And I remember I was roughly the same age as you when The Simpsons came out as well, and it was this grenade in the schoolyard, like who was getting access to it and who wasn't. And I just knew that it was one of the most brilliant things. Like I didn't articulate it as such, but I just thought it was so cool and smart and funny. And I knew that there were jokes that I didn't get at the time, but I would if I paid attention and all that sort of stuff. Like it was rewarding. And I think even like later on in life, you know, like a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Are any of you guys Buffy fans here? You don't need to put up your hand, but yeah. So
I'm
like,
looking
I
at the
just,
people in the
huge
crowd, I'm
Buffy just
guessing are
there.
Buffy fans.
I just kind of love that it had the most objectively terrible title, and that filtered a lot of people out. People like, you watch a show called Buffy the Vampire, like it sounds like porn. And yet, if you actually watch a show, it's so gorgeously, cleverly crafted. Like, it's really, really great. So, and plus, by the time I went to uni, a lot of my friends were media studies nerds, so they were those people.
There's a bit in your book as well, Ben, where your mum does this great thing that I don't think enough people do, which is, we talk about guilty pleasures with television. Your mum talks about staring.
Yeah, she really loves The Bold and the Beautiful, and she calls it staring. Because if you've ever watched The Bold and the Beautiful, there is a lot of, they kind of go to the next scene like this. They kind of look, and it's a beat longer than every other show on television.
Your mom sounds hilarious.
She's totally into it. And
I kind of wish she was sitting in that chair.
Oh, yeah, she probably is in disguise. But she loves that stuff, but then she'll call me up about a new Danish drama that I've never heard of as well. There's no distinction for her.
But that's what I love. I love the idea of her clearly getting enjoyment from the television, no matter what it is, and finding something to enjoy within it. So within Bold and the Beautiful, she loves the fact that, it seems to me from that one sentence, she loves the fact that it is nothing but them staring.
Yeah.
But she's paying attention to it. She's not doing what so many people have spoken about television as being, which is a passive medium.
Yeah.
And it's not. And
She's super engaged. She watches more news than I like. There are news hounds among us, people who work as journalists who are across every news channel. My mum watches probably more news than them. She always had that kind. Because she's raising 5 kids full time as well. And then after I was 12 years old, as a single mum, she didn't have a lot of time on her hands to really go out and engage with the outside world like we did when we were growing up with a lot of extracurricular activities. So TV was kind of like this great access to a lot of really interesting information as well. She could find it too.
Steve, in the suburbs of Boston.
Yes.
Siblings? Do you have?
Yeah, I have an older sister.
You have an older sister.
Yeah.
So what was TV like in your house?
It was made so precious for us by being heavily rationed. It was like this thing that we were not supposed to, you could have a half an hour of it at night. It was like, my parents are very proper kind of people. They're really serious, and they thought the TV was kind of like a guilty pleasure or whatever, so they were very careful about, carefully rationing out TV, so that only made me want it more and more, and look what good it did them.
So did you have cable?
We didn't have cable.
Didn't have cable, so you just had 4 channels.
Yeah, if I would go to somebody's house and they had MTV or something, I would be like,
yeah,
let's sit down, we're watching this. But actually, something that we were talking about came to my mind, which is in Boston, where I grew up, my parents considered the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston to be this great cultural institution. And it is. It's full of all this great art. But the art that's, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has tons of Van Goghs and Monets and, probably the biggest collection of Monets outside of France. And why do they have that? Because in 1870 or whatever, Monet was considered kind of trash in France. And these young upstart guys from Boston who were going over and hanging out in France the way you might go hang out in San Francisco or some NIMBY or something, a kind of hippie, wild place to go. We're this is actually cool. This is really interesting. And they acquired all these paintings that are now worth millions of dollars and considered the epitome of high culture. So what we consider to be very highfalutin and important and elite as culture can often change and have turnover.
It happens over
yeah,
time.
for sure.
But I'm also skeptical of people who rule out an entire platform.
Yeah,
there are
sure.
those people who say, I don't watch television. Television's the same.
Get
or
out of here.
I don't read the news because it's all depressing. And it's well, maybe you're not paying attention to it. There is objectively bad television out there, and there's such great why would you rule it out? I'm always, there's that John Waters quote where he says, if you go home with someone and they don't have books, don't fuck them. I think that's a really good rule. But I kind of also think that about people who rule out television as well. If they don't, you don't need an actual television, but if you don't watch, don't fuck them either.
Yeah. And don't feel bad about it. Don't feel like you're missing out on anything either, because they would be just a dud. Ben, could I ask you to read out it's a little bit of a longer section.
Sure.
But,
So this is
so it's there and it goes over to the next page.
So this is
and it's pretty much the whole
about
book. Just read the whole
my
book.
childhood, and as you know, if you've seen the show, one of young Benjamin's aspirations is to be a big star, which is kind of me, based on me.
On the way from the green room to here, he was stopped like 3 times by people. He's like, "Oh, Ben, I love you."
Are there people involved in the festival?
I don't know. He just seemed famous to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. You seem famous.
Thank you. That's all I want you guys to believe. In my first year of primary school, our class stripped down to our underwear, covered ourselves in black body paint, and pretended to be Aborigines. We were all scheduled to appear in the annual talent showcase. And because there weren't any actual Aboriginal kids in the class, we opted for blackface instead. Students were split into 2 groups. The tallest half would play Aboriginal parents, the short kids would be their children. As the tiniest boy in the group, I was given the role of native infant. It was easy work and involved pretending I was asleep by laying my head in the lap of my tall friend John, who would play my father. We'd all then sing the lullaby, Kara Barra Wirrakana, a song we assumed was traditional, written by a man named Rolf Harris, a man we assumed was Aboriginal. He was not that, and he was not many things. On the evening of the showcase, our parents filed into the assembly hall, and students and teachers huddled backstage, running through the choreography one last time. Sing it soothingly, one of the teachers reminded us. Remember, they sing lullabies to their children too, just like your parents at home. Behind the curtains, John and I took our position at the front of the stage, in amongst the cardboard shrubs and fauna. And it happened all at once. The curtains opened, Mrs. Semler started playing the piano, and the stage light shone with an unexpectedly intense heat, which immediately made our body paint sticky and toxic smelling. There's a lake in South Australia, the Aboriginal parent sang. Little lake with lovely name. And then the rest of us, the Aboriginal kids, rubbed our eyes, as though we were waking from a long dreamtime sleep. And the stories woven round it, we sang sleepily, from the pickaninnies came. Parents cooed. When we finished, the applause seemed to go on forever, and from my prime position at the front of the stage, I lapped it all up. For days afterwards, I was on a high, convinced that show business was my destiny. Things soured a year later when my friend Shelley and I were cast as wolves in the school production of Noah's Ark. Mum and I made snouts and ears out of cardboard, sewed pantyhose stuffed with cotton onto grey leggings, and added dental floss for a tail. And unlike the other animals, the wolves were fortunate enough to have speaking parts. We're so hungry, Shelley announced to the crowd. We just want to howl, I said. Whoa! We cried out in unison. And everyone applauded and laughed, and that was enough for me to immediately want to do it again. And it was difficult to accept. My moment had passed. Because it was a combined year-level performance, all the animals were portrayed by a new set of students after intermission. And as I watched them from backstage reciting their lines, I could barely conceal my contempt for the new wolf in his cheap grey tracksuit getup, which was clearly a Salvation Army purchase. He didn't care about his speaking role, that much was obvious. He had no respect for his craft, and this just made me sick. Who did he think he was, I thought, and since when did wolves have cotton wool stumps for tails? When we got home, I scanned the program frantically, only to find my name had been mistakenly omitted and replaced by the other male wolf. His name appeared twice. Mine was nowhere to be seen. The worst thing was he wouldn't have even cared. What's wrong? Mum asked me when she saw my bottom lip trembling. Nothing's wrong, I said. I said nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. Nothing's wrong. Just shut up. And I threw the program into the corner of the room, started punching the sofa, and broke into open and shameless weeping and howling, a reaction that even surprised me. Clearly, they'd cast me as the right animal. That was 1988, where my school on the Sunshine Coast thought blackface was appropriate. Can you tell that I went to school in a pretty white part of Australia?
So that I want to read for a couple of reasons. One, it shows that idea of what is popular and what is acceptable and what is enjoyed changes significantly. I mean, you can't say pickaninny until high school now in Queensland.
Yeah. I mean, and also Queensland in the 1980s was a very strange place. You know, we were regarded as the backwater of Australia. When they talk about the Deep South In America, we were jokingly referred to as the Deep North. And, homosexuality was still a criminal offence in that era as well. I mean, yeah, odd place, odd time.
But at the end of that section, your name's not in the program.
I know, Devo.
And now your name's on bloody everything.
Awesome.
You showed them.
Yeah, totally.
But with that concept of high art versus low art, both of you have written and published books, but also written and produced TV shows. What do you get more props for, especially like amongst your family or people who know you back home?
That's a good question, actually, because so I've written 2 books, 2.5 kind of. I wrote this joke book called Shit Asian Mother Say with my sister. That's very good to keep beside your toilet. So right now, TV writing is a full-time job for me because we're about to go into production for Series 2 of The Family Law. It's coming up really quickly. So we're frantically doing revisions, and it's been kind of a 9-to-5 thing for me lately. And I've been doing that for the past 2 years. And people still ask me, I say, what are you? They say, what are you working on? And I say, I'm working on the TV show at the moment. And they're like, and when are you writing a new book? And I'm like, I'm not writing a new book. It really is seen like once you're an author, for some people, I think they expect you to keep writing more books. Whereas for me, TV writing is a really new skill. I really like it. I've discovered I really like the TV writing environment. I like working with other people, which is something that even took me by surprise as well. And yet in my family, I think for them, to an extent, the TV thing is far more exciting because, you can kind of tell your friends, but not everyone's a big book reader. You kind of have to go out of your way, even if you're voracious, you might, read between 12 and 20 books a year or maybe more, depending on how fast you read. And not all my family are big book readers, but we all watch a lot of TV. So for them and their broader community, the TV show is a much bigger deal.
Steve, what about you?
Well, the TV shows are so much more widely known that if you just are meeting a stranger or something, they're just more likely to have heard of it. But on the other hand, I feel like somebody who's really a fan of your book, who's read your book and related to it, like that's a person who spent 10 to 20 hours spending time with just you, and they feel really connected to you, and that is like a really strong, powerful connection. Like it's cool to say that I worked on The Office or 30 Rock or something, but my contribution to that was like a guy working in a factory that makes Oreos. Like I had as much to do with it as the guy that hits the Oreo button or something. Like, but this is all me.
I would also be very interested in.
I know. Now that I think about it, we should have a panel with the guy that makes Oreos. But yeah, the person who's engaged with your book is just going to be so much more bonded to you.
It is that intimacy.
Yeah. And also, I'm way more grateful to them because they've done this work of reading my book.
So there's an earlier bit in your book where you talk about going to Caloundra, like going back to Caloundra, where you're known as one of Danny's boys.
Oh, yeah.
Because your dad runs restaurants or businesses there.
Yeah, he's like a known dude.
And so how do you go from being known as someone with relation to someone else, like you are Danny's boys, or in your case, Steve, rather than you've written your own novel, you're a writer on this other person's show. Where's the process to go from being that person who exists in relation to someone else to becoming your own person?
When you're from such a big family, you're always just a part of a larger organism. So you're used to it. You're Danny's boy, you're Candy's brother, you're Bla's brother. I mean, there are a lot of siblings in my family as well. So, and it's interesting because my younger sister is a photographer and my youngest sister is also a writer, mainly a playwright, but also a screenwriter as well. And she writes essays as well. So we're always kind of talked about in the same, like for instance, the other day I met the editor of the Griffith Review for the first time, which is an anthology, which is a journal that both myself, Tammy, the photographer sister, and Michelle, the writer sister, we've all contributed. And she's just like, "You're Michelle, and you're Tammy." Like we're all talked about. It's like the Virgin Suicides, but Asian. And I don't mind that. I'm stoked to be a part of this bigger family, which I guess is kind of like TV writing in a way, because with the model that we use for The Family Law, it's a much smaller writer's room. So, like for instance, the show's producers got nominated for a major producer award the other day, and like you share that with each other because it does feel like a family.
like a family or a team or a...
Yeah.
The family law.
Exactly.
I'm
See
starting
how
to
we've
get it now.
pulled it full circle.
I get it. Steve, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool to be a part of a creative team. That's always really fun. Your work gets made better by being around other creative people, and you get to meet other cool people. That's really awesome. Being a writer of books and stuff you're doing on your own is quite isolating, and it's good that there's this system that gets people together and both keeps you from going completely nuts and allows you to share in the, it's almost like a union or something, like you share in the benefits and you share in the downsides, and by being together you're stronger. But yeah, it's cool to do your own thing too. So yeah, finding that balance is good and a challenge and important.
It's kind of beautiful because I wanted to bring it full circle to place and belonging and identity, and I think we've done that.
Cool.
So thank you guys. That's
No, thank you for your brilliant line of questions.
Look, it's taken a lot of planning. We're going to open it up to the audience now. If you have any questions for Ben, Benjamin, or Steve, still only 2 people, 3 names. Someone will come around with a microphone.
There's one up here.
There is a question right down the front here, and she's ready. While that's happening, on the screen you'll start seeing these are 2 books that you can buy, one by Ben, one by Steve. They'll be signing them out in the foyer. If you go right out towards Flinders Street, there are signing tables, so you can buy a book at readings, get it signed personally to you, or if you want to pretend it's for someone else and say, my sister's name is Carol, but your name is really Carol, right? Yes, question.
Hi, great session. I'm just really interested when you're working as part of a really huge team, putting together 22 episodes of a show. Is there sort of competitiveness among the people that are producing? Like, are people sort of trying to gauge what your output is compared to somebody else's in a creative way?
Competition in the writers'
Yeah,
room.
I think ideally it's healthy, a healthy competition. Everybody's trying to push each other to be a little bit better. If you start getting stressed out and you're like, am I contributing enough? That is unhealthy thinking. It's just going to cause anxiety and not going to help you to be creative. But if you're like, that guy is so funny, I want to be as funny as him, I want to make him laugh, or I want to make her laugh, or like, there's somebody who works on Veep who used to work on Seinfeld, this great writer named Jen Crittenden, and if I make her laugh, my day is made. That is a healthy way to do it, and that is a cool aspect of it. Yeah, but if you get into a state where you're like, fucking hate that guy, I can't believe his stuff got in, like it's just not going to be good for anybody.
Yeah.
Is there also, like, Gary is not pulling his weight. Gary has not come up with a joke in a meeting for weeks.
But Gary, you gotta love Gary, right? It's Gary. I often wonder if you feel that way, like not within the world of your show, but in Australia, you probably know the other people who have shows on the air.
Yeah.
And do you feel any kind of competition with them, or do you ever work together in a positive way?
No, I feel like Australia's what I feel is working in the TV industry here, because we're such a small population generally. Like, we're 24 million people in the whole country, and all the industries are just proportionally smaller. So when you've got like a TV industry, it's super tight. Like, everyone kind of knows each other, and everyone is genuinely friends. Like, you can't not be at least respectful of each other's work.
Who's the bad boy of
well.
Australian TV?
Let me think. I'll tell you backstage later. It's me. And as a result, when people come into the room, you do know their other work, and it's kind of great. Like, our writers' room is a much more tighter sort of thing. So with Series 2, it's our producer / we kind of call her a showrunner, because she does that kind of US role of wrangling everything together, and she's there from day one right up till the end of post as well, and she is the gatekeeper of all of the stuff. Like, even though I'm ostensibly the creator of the show, she's the one who's calling all of the shots, and if a joke works, it's because we've made Sophie laugh, and she's a really good gauge for what is and isn't working. And so, it's a pretty collegiate environment.
The other thing about Australia as well is everybody is repped by one of 3 agencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if you don't like someone, you're going to see them at the Christmas party no matter what.
Right.
So you've just got to enjoy that.
Gotcha.
Just pretend.
Yep.
Just pretend. Another question. Also, you'll see a URL, littlerunningsbear.com/MWF16. I'm going to be putting show notes and links up on that page. So if there's anything you've missed out, you should be able to find it there. There's a question down the front here, and we're going to a man who actually has a microphone over there, and then there's a lady in a crocheted hat.
Thanks, guys. It's been a great discussion. Was interested in something that Ben said about the emotional truth of what you're doing, how you're really aiming for that. And it doesn't actually have to be literally true. I think that was a fantastic comment. And I'm just wondered, I think Australia is lucky that we've got a tradition of British humour and of American, but then we've really got our own special Australian humour. And I just wondered if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the model of bringing it back to the writer's room that we've brought into how the Australian model works is very much a Washminster system. So we do shorter British format shows, like 6 episodes. That's a very kind of BBC model that we've brought in, and it kind of works for our economy of scale here as well. So that's the format that we take on, but we take on kind of aspects of the American writer's room where you get everyone in together and you hash it out in a big group environment as well, because a lot of Australians have worked, in the States or the UK or whatever. So we've kind of made this kind of hybrid mongrel model, and that works there. But in terms of like Australian sense of humour, it's there is stuff that, like for instance, the production company that makes The Family Law, it's an Australian production company, but the parent company is American, the NBCU. So we get American notes as well, and sometimes they will really kind of love The Family Law for its very specific Australian-ness, which they want us to really preserve rather than trying to make it something else. So I feel like that's kind of an advantage. I think there's a reason why a show like Please Like Me worked in the States as well. There's something very specifically Australian about how they represent young queer lives, and also very specifically Melbourne, I think, as well. And the Americans seem to really respond to that. I find, yeah.
Was there an American part, or is it just an Australian part?
I will say something. I've always been, like, in my travels in Australia and New Zealand and the UK, I've been interested to discover that people seem to think that Americans are kind of like sensitive little flowers. And they like you guys imagine yourselves, I think correctly, to be making fun of each other a lot harder than Americans are used to, which is an endearing quality. Australians will tell you to your face if they think you're being stupid, which I think is necessary and valuable.
But I think that's also because we grew up with a lot of American television, because while we had Australian production, the money just wasn't here to produce as much as we needed for 3.5 channels. So so we watched a lot of American television. In American television, everyone's being really supportive, especially like in sitcoms. We would watch a sitcom like Head of the Class, where someone says something and everyone else in the class applauds. Like, they are so supportive of each other.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Veep where we really saw
a British show in a lot of ways.
Which is Armando and Iannucci bringing that sensibility to Americans, where we really actually see them competing against each other and showing and actually just announcing their foibles to each other.
I think we think in the United States that we're like the toughest, roughest guys around, and then you come to Australia and it's like, oh, you should, stupid. It's like, no! Come on!
Your shirt, Stu. I'm going to use that. Next question. There's one over here and there's one over there. So whoever gets a microphone first.
She's
does
got
someone
one.
already have a microphone?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
You got the microphone. You're in charge.
Okay, I'm talking.
Hi.
You touched a little bit before about tragedy within comedy, and I just wondered how much you think, or how far you know, or how you gauge how far to push the audience. My favourite television show of all time is MASH, which was about a very unfunny subject matter and had this incredible ability to rip your heart out and then make you laugh about it. Obviously, most comedy shows aren't quite as challenging as MASH tended to be, but I was just wondering if you are conscious of keeping that balance, or whether it just sort of comes naturally as you write.
Go ahead.
Well, we were making comedy about divorce, so my attitude is that comedy and tragedy are pretty closely entwined. Like, I've been to some of the saddest weddings in the world and some of the funniest funerals, like that kind of sweet and sour is a texture of a lot of those situations as well. So I always embrace stuff like that. And even when we were trying to find the tone of the show originally as well, it was kind of hard trying to say, is it more like Arrested Development because that's a family show with like lots of weird, funny stuff going on? Is it more like that? And as we were writing the show, shows like Girls, Please Like Me, Transparent, those comedy dramas were becoming big, where like on one surface, all of those shows I just mentioned are really dramas that happen to have comedy punctuating a lot of dramatic scenes, and that's kind of how we went ahead with our stuff as well. Like, you can't, and sometimes the laughs are more earned if the sadness is kind of honoured.
Yes, I think that's very well put. Pain and comedy are closely linked together usually. Like, a truly happy, blissed out, zenned out person is rarely that hilarious, I think. Yeah.
And also, for a dramatic device, I find embarrassment and humiliation really fascinating. Like, because you've got comedy and tragedy already in the one hit, you've got a really dramatic learning moment as well, because like when someone's deeply embarrassed, they kind of refuse to be that version of themselves again, even though usually in comedy they're going to be that person for the rest of their lives as well. So with our show, what's more embarrassing than family? What's more embarrassing than puberty? What's more embarrassing than being a part of a sprawling Chinese-Australian family that sticks out like a sore thumb? We all wanted to really harness the embarrassment of growing up when we wrote the show.
But it's a very different embarrassment to, like, some mothers do have them.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where it's someone who is just completely inept at life.
Where you're married to an abomination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that embarrassment of recognition. I see a little bit of myself, or anyone who comes from an ethnic family can see that scene at the Chinese restaurant at Ben's birthday at the start of the series. They can see themselves in that. So there's the embarrassment of recognition versus the embarrassment of the other, which is something we spoke about before.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one here.
Steve, in your novel, How I Became a Famous Novelist,
Yes.
You paint a very clear picture of what success looks like to some people. And I'm just wondering if that's something, I guess, to both of you, is that something that remains an endpoint for you, or is it an ever-evolving feast?
I think that you will usually find that, like, the tangible markers of success are made to feel, this totally hollow, and it doesn't really, it's not, you're not going to be made happy by like achievement. You'll be made happy by love and being loved and giving back to other people. And so the thing of like, if I win this prize, if I get this promotion, usually that will not bring you what you want. And so it's still kind of fun to play the game and try and get it. But ultimately, like, I find like when my book comes out and I get copies of my book in the mail, I'm like, all right, great. It's satisfying for like 5 minutes, and then you're sort of like, okay, what do I do now? Move on with my life. It's the actually doing of it and the work fulfilling in life, and that's a little bit frustrating. It would be nice to think that you could get to some secure place where you could just be blissed out and happy, but that's not the way the world works, and the ground under you is never totally secure. You always have to keep moving, so you have to just enjoy the actually hard work of doing it more than the, tangible reward.
Well, that's the lie that film and novels have sold us, is that there is an ending.
Right.
And there isn't one, which is
every
why
romantic comedy ends with a marriage, right? But what marriage is just like chilled out bliss for forever? It's the beginning of a new struggle,
Did you have like an idea of, when you were a teenager or growing up, like, this is what I want to be and this is my idea of what a successful person in that industry is?
I guess the first thing I wanted was to get a job, and then I got one, and then I was like, okay, well, now I need to, what's next? Pretty quickly you're like, I want a new thing, and yeah. I guess, how did you feel about that? Did you dream of having your own TV show? And then
I wanted to not die as a writer. And I know that sounds really facetious, but the idea that you could make a living off your writing. Like even now, I think
making
the
a living as a
idea
writer
that
is
you can
cool.
make your living
Yeah.
off what you wanted to do, because I'm a child of migrants who didn't necessarily do what they wanted to do when they came to this country.
Yeah.
And so they really instilled in us, make sure you're doing what you want to do and that you like it and that you're good at it and can earn money off it. If you can tick all of those boxes, which I think is a really hard thing for any of us to do, then you've done it. And I kind of like it is about the work, but it's kind of like the fact that I'm even living off this is pretty like I'm stoked. I'm stoked.
Cool.
And that said, the work doesn't stop either. The work has to speak on its own terms.
Did your parents think that it was strange when you wanted to become a writer? Were you expressing that you
I
wanted to
thought
be a
it was
writer?
pretty strange that I said, "Hey, I've got a book deal and it's about you guys." That was a strange kind of moment.
Do they give you notes on the show?
Oh yeah, there's feedback. There's feedback, but it's never anything like too intense or confrontational. And I think my folks, they're stoked as long as we're happy and not, living in sort of artist-induced poverty.
Well, I think on that note of just none of us living in artist-induced poverty.
Thank goodness.
We
Yeah,
have
we get
to
free water.
Yeah, you get free water. There was tea in the green room you could have had.
That's pretty
and,
good.
And teddy bear biscuits, not chocolate-covered teddy bear biscuits.
I got some free
just
bookmarks
plain.
at the counter. I'm pretty happy about that.
Black
that-
market.
That brings us to the end because we've got to get you guys out to sign some books. So please thank Benjamin and Steve.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, and thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. For a great job. Yeah.